Hello, I'm Varsha Wallace. This is the One Precious Life podcast. I'm particularly interested in fabulous people living their precious lives, doing inspiring work in or alongside their day jobs. Today we are meeting David Young. David is a very interesting guy. He's an entrepreneur who has been involved in everything from Harley Davidson bikes to weather forecasting technology, as well as a side passion in training people to find their inner public speaker. And we're going to hear all about this right now. Hello, Dave.
Hi, Basha. Nice to see you again.
You too. So we met through mutual friends in a grungy pub in Camden back in the 1990s, and you were in your early 20s. What were you doing at that point?
Back in the early 90s, I was working for, and yes, but sorry, I should answer it firstly. We did meet in a grungy pub, and I think we continued to meet in grungy pubs for about 10 years
We
after
did.
that, right? So, yeah, in terms of work back in the early 90s, I came to London in 1988, and had a job working for an international distribution and shipping company. So it was kind of not the most interesting job, but it was a job. And coming out of Ireland in the late 80s, it was obviously it was a good thing to have.
Yeah, and I suppose back then it was probably the economy wasn't as strong as it is now. So, and it's probably like me leaving New Zealand. It was growing up in a beautiful but small place, and in order to sort of not just have adventure but also see the world and potentially grow your career, you needed to leave, didn't you?
Yeah, most certainly. It wasn't fun. I mean, Ireland, obviously, coming out of the 70s, 80s, it was a pretty, you don't know it at the time because you're just a teenager, you're having fun, you're doing your studies, you're hanging out with friends and whatever else. But I think watching other friends leave, and typically a lot of them were going to America at the time. And I even actually had a green card to actually use at that particular point, but I chose to come to London. I think London is one of those places that you think you can come to, you have friends there already, and it's just an hour away. You can fly back to
Yeah.
Dublin very easily, so it's just an hour. So having that kind of connection to Dublin and Ireland was always going to be important for me.
And so you were sort of working away, going to grungy pubs, and sort of in a job that you were, I suppose, enjoying it a bit, or how were you finding it?
I think I was finding my feet. You come out,
Yeah.
what age was I? I was 22, maybe
Mm.
23. Um, and I think at that early age, it's like you don't know what to expect. You're in London, it's the bright lights, it's the big city, and you don't know what you're doing in reality. I look at people who seem to have their careers kind of set out in front of them. I certainly wasn't one of those. So going to
I
that
was the
particular,
same. Yeah.
yeah.
I turned up with my backpack and absolutely just, just a bit of a plan to see the world, but that was about it. So,
Yeah, and I
yeah.
remember you guys back
Mm,
then. I think there was a
mm,
set of five Kiwi girls that got off the boat,
mm.
right?
Yeah, exactly. Looking for adventure.
Yeah, I look back at it now, and all of these things kind of shape, what you do in the future.
Yeah.
It wasn't easy. It wasn't a simple job, and it's certainly looking back, I didn't enjoy it, but I didn't know any better. It's just you get up in the morning, you go to work, and you live for the weekend to a certain extent. You're learning a lot, and you're hanging out with your friends that you knew from Ireland or whatever else, and you're making new friends in London. So in that side of life, it's very, very exciting. But from the work perspective, I knew I wanted to change, so I changed a few. I think I had three jobs before I actually decided to kind of make a significant career change.
Yeah. And what was that, the significant career change? Tell us about that.
Well, I was probably after a kind of one of our weekends in Camden, that I remember going to work on a Monday morning and going in and sitting there with the board and various other people and thinking to myself, I just didn't want to do this anymore. I couldn't really be serious about it. It wasn't something I was actually enjoying. And I just thought, if I'm going to do 40, 50, 60 hours a week, working, I needed to do something I enjoyed and I needed to do something for me.
Yeah.
So it was at that point that I kind of made a conscious decision to look for something that I actually kind of would really enjoy. And the only thing I could think of at the time was like, what did I actually like? What could I actually potentially turn into a business as well, based on the work I'd already been doing. And that was inclusive of the work I've already been doing. And that was an idea about exporting Harley Davidsons from the UK across to Europe,
Yeah.
to dealers in Europe.
Were you into bikes? Was
Yeah,
that a
always. Bikes were always one of my passions, so
yeah.
from an early age, from push bikes migrated as soon as I possibly could to motorcycles. So I had motorcycles when I was in Ireland. My dad was into his motorcycles early on, but I don't really remember the big motorcycles. I remember the small kind of moped ones. And
Yeah.
so it was yeah, but I really love bikes,
And
motorcycles.
so the bikes, did you have a bike? Did you have a motorbike?
I think within the first couple of years of in London, I didn't, but by the third or fourth year in London, um, I was buying motorcycles, yeah,
Yeah.
for
So
personal use.
yeah, I mean,
Not
because
Harleys, not Harleys. I would never have thought at that age, sort of mid-20s, that I was going to be into Harleys.
yeah,
But that was where the market was. So it was a question of like, well, I enjoyed sports bikes, what's wrong with Harleys? But that's definitely where there was a potential market for used Harleys and by European dealers.
and how did you know that there was a market for used Harleys?
It's if you're in the bike world, you're talking to other bikers, and you kind of have ideas. And I had one friend who was into Harleys as well, and he was always talking about like that as a possibility. And I was saying, yeah, okay, let's look at it. So we looked at that as a possibility of doing some business there, but he wasn't particularly um, himself orientated towards the business side of things. So
Yeah,
I was the one who kind of set up the business and had a look at it. But I say set up the business. I mean, it was as simple as I researched pre-internet
yeah,
by going to libraries and finding out from local authorities or UK trade organisations about what was being exported. What were the numbers? Obviously, I knew how to export and import.
yeah,
I knew how to deal in currency exchanges. There wasn't a euro. This was back in the days of Deutschmarks and liras and stuff, right?
yeah,
So I knew all of these aspects of things, and I had a passion for motorcycles. So it was really a question of combining the two of them. So for the first year, literally, I was reaching out to dealers across Europe,
yeah,
and I was saying, "This is the idea. This is the concept." In addition to that, um, just the company I was working for at the time actually found out that I was actually trying to do something on my own, and that
right,
was the end of my job as their sales manager. So
right,
it was like bye bye, nice car, expenses
yeah,
account, but all of it I hated.
yeah,
So I was okay with it, and I do remember coming back to our house in St. Augustine's Road, and joining everybody else there, pretty much unemployed, at that particular stage. So it was a good transition period. It was the right time to do something. Um, but it took about a year and a half to kind of get the first orders, to get everything in shape. And I'd also applied for, which I've just remembered actually, I also
mm,
applied for a kind of grant from Camden Council, a business grant. Uh,
right,
and they made me kind of write a business plan again and again and again, which I had done before.
yeah,
Uh, but I did that, and it was a great learning curve as well to actually just be dealing with like the London kind of not bureaucracy, but these people are here to give you a grant, but this in order to get that you really got to work for it. So we did that, and I got my first customer in Germany, a guy called
yeah.
Richard Cowley, which was just great, And I bought my first motorcycle, and then a second, and a third, and a fourth. And within a year, we'd actually kind of gone probably three, four times over what the original business plan had actually forecasted.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And then when those bikes were coming in, you were then selling them on in the UK.
No, initially, how it started was this was like kind of older Harleys.
Yeah,
Going across the dealers in Europe, and we were
yeah,
benefiting from the exchange rates and also the interest in Harleys in Europe, especially in Germany and
yeah,
Belgium, was much higher than it was here in the UK. And I think there was those economies at the time were much stronger, so they had a bit more kind of to spend on what would be considered a luxury item.
yeah. And so where did the bikes come from?
Well, the bikes originally are made in the US, right? You
Yeah,
know, the
yeah,
Harleys. So I would buy them from individuals. I would buy
yeah,
them from dealers.
yeah,
And that was just fantastic because the
yeah,
people you're meeting back then, those days, it's like everything from which I would imagine were probably gang members, like at a kind of high level, to Hell's Angels, to company directors, to yeah, to guys, producers and movie producers, everything, musicians, well-known musicians, everybody, kind of at a certain had a penchant for Harleys at that particular point.
yeah. So they were originally from the US, came to the UK. You were buying them off those individuals and then selling them on into Europe.
Yeah, they would have been their
Yeah,
private bikes mostly. I bought
yeah,
sometimes from some dealers, and then I was selling to dealers. So sometimes
yeah,
I would go over, I would bring eight bikes over with a trailer, van and trailer over to Europe, and it was great. Just the experience of the travel, meeting the different dealers, and just meeting kind of people from all walks of life here in the UK as well.
yeah. And I suppose you were really united by a passion for bikes. Like it sort of brings people together, doesn't it? As you say, all people from all different walks of life. Like you had everything that you were, dealing with.
Yeah, like anything, right? If you find that connection
Mm,
point with people,
yeah.
it's great. If you've got that shared passion, you may not obviously be into other aspects of their livelihoods, and nor want to discuss it in some cases. But very much it was the joy of motorcycles, and what motorcycles gave them, it gave me, So it was great.
Yeah, yeah. I remember at that time, I remember you were doing a lot of travel and you were kind of going to glamorous locations and you were doing a lot of, going out on your bike and, hearing it sounded like it was a really exciting time, wasn't it? And you
You
don't
know, to be
necessarily realize it then, do you? But looking back,
Oh, I think I did. I mean, it was hard enough, for that
mm,
first year and a half. It was kind of tough enough to get it going. But once it was going, and I remember a kind of nice story anyway. When I was going back, when I used to go back to Ireland, my folks were typically used to me coming back. I remember only in mid-20s at this stage. Used to coming back to me, and it felt cool going back in the company car and having the account and whatever else. And this time round, I did, I'd no money, very little money, and it's all been saved for like the business. And I remember walking along the beach with my mum and dad, and yeah, kind of my mum asking me at one stage, and I'd gone home on the ferry, by bus.
yeah,
uh, on the ferry across to Dublin. I mean, that was at the time the cheapest way you could do anything, So, but I
yeah,
remember walking along the beach and telling my mum and dad about the idea behind this and whatever else, and it was, my mum saying, "But what are you going to do if it doesn't work?" And I just thought, it's like, "But what do you mean? Of course it's going to work."
yeah,
Because it's not kind of youth has that kind of confidence, and
yeah,
I had nothing attached to me at that particular stage. So, and I didn't feel like I could ever go back to what I was doing. So this had to work.
yeah,
But I remember that, just not in terms of confidence or cockiness, but just as in you're not working with a net, there's no fallback. So this has to work. And it was a lovely moment for me because a year later, it really had worked.
And then what happened?
Um, I just kept ticking along, and then we
Yeah,
kind of had a look at with Richard and myself. That's my German business partner.
yeah.
We started seeing like what was going on in the U.S. market, and we made a plan then to kind of start exporting Harleys back to the U.S. Um,
Wow,
and that wasn't going to be ones and twos. That was like by the container load, and these
wow,
were brand new Harleys coming across to the UK, or into Europe, and we were actually at this stage. I knew a lot of the importers and a lot of the big dealers and stuff. So we would be going to the dealers and the importers and saying, guys, look, we'll buy everything you've got, and yeah, sure, they're only making a couple of percent, but it's immediate. And then we were actually then selling by the container load back to dealers in the US, and we had an appointed distributor in the US for doing that as well.
wow. That's quite an amazing story. And was I assume that was because there was an appetite for them, people. they were.
Yeah, so it was a niche. There was a
Yeah,
dollar, euro primarily was the currency exchange. So we could see like
yeah,
there was that there was benefits at that particular stage. I think this was just in '99. I think we kicked that off. So just the time of the euro as well, right?
yeah,
Um, so and I had some friends that were also in the foreign exchange business, PLC company, and they were giving us some fantastic rates. So it all worked in our favor. It all came together. And then you had dealers in the States, and typically in America, it's they don't think small,
yeah, yeah,
they think big. So typically there were quite considerable deals, seven, eight figures very often, which was significant. And we'd send everything over. It was interesting in the respect of from making money.
yeah.
But what was less interesting was actually dealing with the people,
Right.
because at that point it was all about just one thing, money, right?
Yeah,
So you don't meet the characters,
yeah,
such. You're just meeting kind of the business people, and that is all. Whereas there's no real, stories that I was getting in the past from people coming into the shop, or if I was going to meet people, there was none of that anymore. But from a business point of view, um, it was great. It was fantastic.
that kept ticking along for a while, didn't it?
Yeah, yeah, that was nice. So at that stage, I mean, we're still doing some other stuff with motorcycles. We were importing what's called in the grey market. We were importing Ducatis, and I was importing a kind of specialist kind of top end bikes for here in the UK, while still also doing the Harleys.
Yeah,
Um, but I could see the kind of writing in the wall in that, and if you do something long enough, and if you're reliant a little bit on currency exchange, and not even a little bit, things are going to kind of come to an end at some point. So it made sense to exit that business. So
yeah,
Richard and myself, and at which stage I was thinking, right, okay, do I really want to go back to, kind of dealing with motorcycles, or do I find something new? I now had that kind of interest in reinvention. And actually, one of the promises I made to myself um, when I did kind of have that idea about I want to do something for myself was always do something that I'm interested in, do something that I'm passionate about.
yeah,
Because I knew if I have that, then it's going to help me a lot to get through because I wasn't passionate about the other work, and I knew that I
yeah,
needed to do something I was passionate about. And the other thing I was passionate about was kind of like sailing, of whatever type. So I grew up near the sea in Dublin, and I love my sailing and windsurfing. I was a competitive swimmer from an early age, so being around the ocean or getting out there was always of interest. And we were using this website at the time, which was just seemed to be the most accurate website ever. And during that period of doing the bikes, they kind of disappeared, near the end of that. And I reached out to them, and kind of, there were few scientists based in Scandinavia, and they'd gone into liquidation with the company that they had running it. And so I reached out to them, and naively they came over, and uh, I'm saying I'm the naive one in this scenario,
yeah,
right? But they come
yeah,
over, and we had a chat about what we could do, and how I could potentially, promote the business, and what my ideas were for it, and whatever. Um, so we put together a company, and they had a company in Iceland, which I became part of, a new company. And we focused on the kind of leisure maritime industry about providing what's called high resolution meteorological and ocean data. So we were modeling um, very high resolution data. So it was potentially more accurate over a short space of time. And this would be very useful for, say, people into sail racing. It turned out it was useful for a lot of other things as well. So in the end, we had clients from companies that were into wind farms, the energy derived from wind farms. They need to know what the weather is on a very accurate basis. We had World Rally Championship teams that were using us to forecast for their events around the world. So we had like customers like that. We
and
even
it was
were,
like it was micro forecasting, really, wasn't it? So it was quite specific to
yeah,
a
that's a
place
good way of
and
putting
and
it.
what. what you that's how I remember you describing it to me at the time. It was like what you were doing, especially if you were, as you say, out doing something near the water, something you really needed to know what the weather was going to be doing, quite a specific element that you needed that information for.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So if you're into your sailing or you're windsurfing and you live
Yeah,
in London, the last thing that you wanted to do is drive down on a sea area forecast and just go down there and realize, it's like, okay, it's not a force 5 or it's not a force 6 as predicted. It's actually a force 3 or 4. That's a wasted day.
yeah,
So if I knew, and what I found with this company, this forecast service, was that I could actually plan virtually to the hour and go, okay, if I arrive down at 4 o'clock after work or something, um, then the force 5 or the force 6 is going to kick in, and that's perfect kind of windsurfing conditions. And then it's going to dissipate at such and such. So there's my window. So that
yeah.
was really what interested me in this, was like, my God, all the time that I'm actually saving by, just going online and actually having a look at this forecast and saying, right, it's accurate, it's to the point, so I knew if I was interested in it, and that was kind of like the concept. If I'm interested in it, in this level of forecasting, then other people will be as well.
And I mean, it's a classic case of making something your passion into a career and building a business around it, because I remember you telling me at the time you were like going windsurfing and this
Mm.
website that you'd been using, it wasn't there anymore, and you tracked down the guys who built it because it was so accurate, and you were, like it was, because I remember at the time as well, you describing to me that you had sold your business and you were sort of trying to work out what to do next, and so you were spending a lot of time windsurfing, but that you didn't necessarily realize that the answer was going to come through your windsurfing. I just remember thinking that was a really fascinating story of how you got there.
Yeah, that's a nice way to put it. And I think that's right. I think you learn a lesson in terms of, if it's right for you, it kind of comes.
Yeah.
But you have to be kind of, doesn't mean you just sit back and, have a cigar and wait for something to arrive. But if it sounds interesting, and it really sounded interesting to me to actually do something with these guys. And then when I met them, they're just, to be now moving into the kind of science world at that particular point, with these kind of scientists from Iceland. And they were interesting guys. I mean,
Mm.
it's like how this was done was fascinating. So yeah, we took it from that, and we built it up to a point where we actually were built into. We worked with an organization or a company called Ray Marine, which are a big name in leisure maritime. They typically provide the what's called multi-function displays, the computers that sit on boats.
Yeah.
And we were the first company to create an application where you could actually download directly from our servers, the forecast directly onto the MFD. So we were actually built into every MFD that was being produced by Ray Marine at the time.
Wow, that's amazing. So that people in their, would you call them boats or ships in their,
You can call them vessels or boats.
yeah, vessel, yeah, that they could use that technology was instantly available to them.
Sounds grander than it is. I mean, at
Yeah.
the end of the day, it's like, what we were finding out relatively quickly is that sailors are reluctant, regardless of the value of their boat. They're not the most forthcoming in terms of, paying for anything like that. Internet should be free. This kind of concept was lingering around a little bit. So at that point, we considered, it's like, what else do we do with this as well? Business to business was obviously a far had a lot more potential, I think, in the end. Uh,
And so what happened then?
so at one point, we'll briefly touch on this, and then we'll move on. At one point, I also went down the investor route for that company. And so after a couple of years, it was clear that there was a lack of compatibility. Um,
Yeah.
so I decided to kind of move on. And
Yeah.
at that particular stage, I started looking at what was considered, this is in 20, now we're moving up into like 2015, started a new company with a focus on commercial maritime.
And
Uh,
what's, and that's like big ships, I guess, big
That's
vessels
big
who are,
ships.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So, in the speak that you'll hear typically
yeah,
in this arena, it's like 90% of world goods are covered are carried by commercial shipping.
yeah.
So there's about 60,000, doesn't sound like a lot, but there's about 60,000 commercial vessels traveling around the world of various sizes. And they create somewhere in the region of 4% of the world's global CO2 emissions.
Wow. Gosh.
And which equates to somewhere in the region of around um, close to 1 billion tons of CO2 a year is emitted from vessels.
Wow. And
So at this particular stage, I'm thinking, okay, I always had a kind of penchant as well for sustainability,
yeah,
even though it might look a little bit kind of paradoxical, having been dealing in 10 years, some years before that, 10 years before that, having been dealing in motorcycles. But at some point, motorcycles were an answer as well.
yeah,
They're a better
yeah,
option for traveling into town or into the city. Um, but yeah, so looked at that. We started or I started seeing what was possible to do in that particular market, and knowing there were some big kind of digital platforms out there that were specifically working with all the big shipping companies. And we were speaking to one of them at the time, um, who wanted a replacement for their existing kind of weather forecasting element to that, the routing element to their solution. And we looked at that and realized it was going to take a minimum of 2 years. But during that period of reviewing that, um, I also noticed that everybody was using
yeah.
AI specific to this particular requirement, but it was old.
Right.
It was actually old AI. It's like Dijkstra's algorithm, things like that, single objective optimization. And but everybody looks at these things, and they go AI, right? It's like the early days
Yeah,
of the internet. Oh, we got a website or something. We don't know how it works, but we're kind of blinkered.
yeah,
And
yeah.
everybody was looking at this in a sense of it's a software problem, and the science, the technology, the deep tech behind it um, hadn't been kind of looked at for a very long time because everybody thinks AI is AI, unless you're a scientist. So
Yeah,
nobody was looking at that, and I knew myself that we couldn't challenge the big kind of digital platforms, but we could do something where we could enhance that technology. So I went to Southampton University. Actually, no, one step before that, my chairman at the time suggested I actually go to this kind of Dragon's Den weekend event, which was down in Basingstoke. And it's quite
yeah,
an interesting story, right? Um, and it was kind of there was, I think, 60 companies there, and you spend the weekend listening to entrepreneurs and people who've been through all of this before, and you build a plan about what you're going to present at the end of the couple of days. And so you're kind of then pitching to what is a kind of fake, but they are an industry-based Dragon's Den team in front of all of the other companies. So you spend all of that time working at a table with several other people, or about 10 other people, 10 other companies, and you come up with a plan, and then you do your presentation at the end of it. So I did the presentation at the end of it, and I was like, okay, thank God that's over. It's like, okay, that's done. Nice experience, whatever else. And at the end, after doing, assessing everybody and stuff, they came back and they said, okay, typically we don't give prizes, or we don't commend any presentations or ideas and whatever else, but there is one that we think is worthy of commentary here. And I was going, oh man, I think I know the one, right? I was thinking it was, such and such. And it actually turned out to be, our presentation, or my presentation, for the kind of reduction of emissions using a more advanced optimization algorithm. And
right.
and it was actually through that. And it was quite kind of like, it was quite enlightening that we
Yeah,
actually got that kind of, or I got that kind of quick endorsement, I would say, from industry.
yeah.
And then through meeting those guys, it was them who actually put me in touch with the science team at maritime team at Southampton University.
The idea of the sustainability is that because the forecast was more accurate, would that allow these big emissions to be sort of better utilised in terms of the journeys that they were taking? Is that the I break it down to probably not a very scientific, but is that
Yeah.
how it? Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's part of it. It plays a small part in it. I always thought it was going to play a bigger part in it, but it does play a part for sure. But there is multiple elements in that. Um, but when I presented it to um, Southampton University and Professor Adam Sobey and his team down there, Adam's also the lead in maritime at the Alan Turing Institute, and he'd been working on what's called a genetic algorithm,
right.
a multi-objective genetic algorithm. So we discussed like what could be done in that because I explained, like this is our industry. This is where it is. It's sitting in the past. I knew a little bit about where I'd been reading up a little bit about where AI had actually managed to find itself in recent years. And there'd been that quite hiatus in terms of industry applications. So it was quite interesting to really hear Adam and his kind of take on it. And he'd been working with his team on this genetic algorithm, AI, for previously 10 years. And they thought that it could possibly work with our solution, with our requirement. And so we applied for a space technology grant, which was coming from the UK government, and we were successful in that application. And that took us from kind of where we were with the GA TRL technology readiness level 2, which is where we started with, to 7.
Yeah. Wow.
From 7, we spent the next several years kind of an R&D developing it into an operational solution. And we released then back in um, mid 2022. But to answer your question, the idea of like weather is a relatively important aspect of it, but there's many other things, so the data you're getting from the vessels is very important. So you need high resolution, preferably high resolution data about the efficiency of that vessel, how it's performing and in certain conditions, what is the speed fuel power curve. All of these things actually need to be inputted into our algorithm. And what we actually had developed was a something quite significant that could handle all the mass of this new data that was now in the marketplace. Everybody knows now that data is kind of like 100 years ago would have been oil. Data is incredibly important for these solutions
Yeah.
to work. But if you have an old solution or old AI, just the capacity of that AI cannot handle the level of data that's now being poured into it. So we have all of these kind of new data inputs coming in: vessel models, weather data, ocean data, um, charter party arrangement information. All of these things are actually now feeding in. And what we were seeing was with our first kind of client who'd been working with us, benchmarking with us, which was a very large kind of tanker company, that they were seeing like significant savings over and beyond the best in class of existing software.
Wow, that's
So
incredible.
they could see, which was great for us because now we had that
Yeah.
validation from a kind of industry leader, both and from a technology point of view, because they were always at the forefront of tech, and they validated it, and then they were our first customer. So they were seeing savings, which don't sound like a lot in all honesty, somewhere in the region of 5 and 7% on fuel. But if you've got a $1 million fuel bill a year, it turns out it's quite significant.
And also your footprint as well, your carbon footprint, I imagine is,
Massively, yeah.
yeah,
That's now driving the industry more than it
yeah,
was when we started. So the
yeah,
International Maritime Organization has brought in a lot of kind of legislation in terms of how to reduce the carbon footprint of these shipping companies.
yeah,
So it affects things like your borrowing rates, your lending rates from banks are affected. Certain banks, if you don't have a good rating, certain banks will increase their rates or not lend at all. So there's lots of things, whether or not you'll be selected as a kind of, they say, top of class by a charterer who has a particularly kind of what do you call it? Let's call it high end client. That doesn't want to use anything but like the A-rated vessels,
yeah,
all of these things, and I think everybody is now getting a lot more conscious about emissions.
yeah.
Um,
That's
and it's
important.
quite a sobering thought sometimes when you see the numbers as well.
Yeah.
The colossal numbers of what we're actually using. So it was nice to be kind of managing something that was sustainable, deep tech, AI, all of these things coming together.
Yeah, and who knew that you were just out windsurfing and, you know what I mean? And it would lead to this, that you'd be
Yeah,
reducing, CO2
yeah,
emissions with super tankers. I mean, it's quite an incredible journey and story of what
yeah.
things can lead to. I think about, having a passion that you're into as well.
I think if you might be the same. I think a lot of people are. If I knew then what I know now about it, um, I would have ran away. Not
Yeah,
because I would have thought it was too hard, but it was just the journey, and the journey had like lots of iterations along the way.
yeah,
And each
yeah,
one is like a learning curve, and you go, okay, we can manage that, and we can manage that, and we built a great team. We
yeah,
have Adam Sobey working with us, as a professor. We have Dr. Przemysław Grudnowski, who also worked on the algorithm at the time, moved from Southampton University directly to us. And so there's a really, they always say, right? I think there's a saying something like, how do you build a good company? Surround yourself with great people.
yeah, absolutely. And so that's ticking along, is it? That continues to tick along as,
Oh, absolutely. We're
yeah,
we're it's
yeah,
gone very well. We have
yeah,
fascinating project as well, full autonomy project with an organization called DARPA,
yeah,
which is that's for full autonomy basically, where the algorithm also works on a fully autonomous basis, so it can be plugged into vessels that work without people.
right.
Um, it's typically, it's a bit further down the line, but it's a
Yeah.
fascinating project with a very influential organization.
Wow, that sounds incredible. I want to hear about your journey into the public speaking side of things because that's been really interesting.
It's yeah, it's a human thing, I guess, at the end of the day. I
Yeah,
remember in the latter part of my time in Dublin, and certainly in school and college, struggling kind of emotionally, having been fine for a long time, and then all of a sudden, things kind of getting a bit kind of sketchy, and thinking like, what's going on? And I think it's a human thing to actually kind of blame ourselves for this, and say, well, I need to be better. I need to
yeah,
improve. I need to do this and whatever else. So um, part of that journey then was like, there was a big gap. Obviously I started the company, and there was no need for doing these kind of things or big presentations, whatever else. But when I felt like that was coming back around again, I decided to go back and actually have a look at um, that side of my kind of personal development. It's like, why did I struggle in those particular scenarios? So I did various courses over the years, and I met everybody from the time, everything from Concorde pilots to movie producers to professors, to just giving you an idea that this was something that clearly was present with a lot of people, that inability to kind of make a good connection, or that kind of worry before a presentation or whatever else. So um, I started looking at that, and I started going, okay, I need to improve, and doing lots of courses on that, and gradually feeling like, yeah, I'm improving, but still kind of plagued with that idea about, I need to improve, I need to be better. And I started doing these courses back in, new courses back in, I think it was just before COVID. So it was kind of 2019. And soon into that, I was asked, was I prepared to host doing these as well? And I went, yeah, no, I'd love to. So I remember doing the first one, and it was like, again, it's like, it's not a big class, but it's maybe 30 people in the class, and you're kind of having to host this session, and it's hosting. It is, I am there as kind of like a facilitator, not to give, or tell people this is how you do it, but just to experience it, and kind of like lead the session. But that developed into kind of having an insight into one thing is, and that most people are actually striving for, and we're kind of conditioned to strive, and we're conditioned to always think, I can be better and I can be better. But what I became quite aware of is like that, what happens when we actually consider ourselves enough,
I
you
love
know?
that.
Yeah.
That really stuck with me because I obviously, as part of preparation, I came to one of your sessions, and I thought that really stuck with me, that I am
Mhm.
enough.
I am enough, you know?
Mm.
And what
Yeah.
happens when we actually kind of decide that? And I must give credit to a guy that I met in the early days doing these talks, a guy called John Dawson, who really kind of led me into that aspect of, you can be enough. This is just a conversation, all of these things. And John's still doing these courses and stuff in the weekends. And all around the country. He's a fantastic kind of role model in that area. So thanks, John. If you ever see this, I'll send it to you. So but I took this, but also one of the things I noted is that it's something that we have to repeat and keep telling ourselves. So I could do these courses for a weekend and come away feeling like, wow, I feel great. It's like I think I've got a handle on this, and so on and so on. Um, but one of the other aspects of this that I figured out was that public speaking is a kind of Pandora's box. We package a lot into it, and we're kind of focused on kind of, if I can just be better, then people will respect me and they'll see me for who I believe I want to be. Um, but then that comes back to like, I'm enough. You don't need to do this. Can you actually just be present in that moment and enjoy that connection? Because if we're continually striving, we're continually dragging ourselves away from that fundamental core of ourselves, that just says, that is afraid sometimes to be seen or to be heard or whatever. It's just, how can we speak from that kind of authentic place?
Yeah.
Rather than the kind of persona that we kind of want people to believe, or that kind of ego side of ourselves that says, I'm the CEO, or I'm the kind of, this high flying executive at a, whatever, film business or TV business or whatever it is, and everybody, it's amazing that everybody kind of, or pretty much most people actually quite relate to that regardless what they're coming to. So essentially it's a deep human thing that most people just, are kind of almost afraid to be really seen.
Yeah.
And we build up these cores around us, this kind of hard outer shell of, I'm the architect, or I'm the kind of, as I said, the CEO, or I'm this, or I'm that. But what are you? Once you strip these things away, who are you? What are you? And can we then speak from that particular place? And it's difficult because if we drag that into our kind of working scenarios, very often we're kind of having to kind of look at a kind of our persona, our ego that's attached to that, and say, how do we marry these two things together? But if we want to be authentic, we have to know that we can actually validate ourselves by saying, I am enough,
Yeah.
and what leads us
Yeah.
to think we are not? Almost everything.
It was interesting when we spoke after the course that I came to, and I said, you said to me, "What do you want from this?" And I said, "Oh,
Mhm.
I'm considered a good public speaker. I do lots of presentations at work. I do this. I do a lot." And I did ask for some extra training from my boss at one point, and he said, "Why? You don't need it. What do you want?" And I said, "I want to be really good. I want to be amazing." And you said to me, "Maybe you just need to be your authentic self." And that really stuck with me. I've been
Mhm.
thinking I kept thinking, and I thought, oh yeah, maybe I don't need to be more like da. I just actually need to just tell the stories that I want to tell and listen to the stories that I want to listen to. I thought that was very powerful.
Yeah, I mean, we are, at the end of the day, it's a conversation, right? If we can
Mm,
break it down into that, we want to connect. We don't want to be kind of fearful of these things. A certain amount of trepidation is good, it brings up the energy and stuff, but we don't want to be kind of living in fear of this.
mm,
What if somebody sees me for, this, um, that there are some cracks in this, or whatever else, or I feel vulnerable, and all of these things. But if we accept those vulnerabilities, all that's where all our strengths lie.
yeah,
It's not in actually trying to big ourselves up and say, well, I am the perfect public speaker and I am a great orator and all of this stuff. Um, if we can just say to ourselves, like, wow, it's incredibly powerful that we can rely just on ourselves.
yeah, and tell those stories. And all the other thing that I took away from that event, which really reminded me, was the personal stories. You can say,
Yeah,
do you want to buy this great car? But actually, you need to tell the story
yeah,
about why you want the car. Do you want to sit in the car? Do you want to smell the leather? Do you how far, all of the just those kind of things that that stuck with me. That's what we all relate to. I think is that's I know Noval Harari, isn't it? In his book *Sapiens*, he talks about that's what makes us human is our
Yeah.
ability to tell stories and trade as well. But the storytelling is yeah, it's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, we want to be, especially after COVID as well, I think, is we became quite insular.
Yeah,
Over Teams, it's just not the same. You and I think we did with one of our friends as well, Louise. We did a couple of dinners and stuff. It was fine. It was novel to start with, but it's not there. It's like we're not
no,
making that connection. And I think that
yeah,
was, I think after that, people kind of really had a sense that what was important to them was actually making connections, was actually
yeah,
relating to people again, relating to their
yeah,
friends, and to be seen.
yeah,
Just
yeah,
to have that connection and to be seen. So we crave that, and we can have that as well with strangers. On the
yeah,
course you came to, how quickly people break down, if they're allowed kind of that safe space to actually try this and actually kind of really be open with strangers and present on that basis or to speak on that basis, how quickly things can become quite personal, and how quick we gravitate to that. It's lovely to watch each and every time I do it. It's just fantastic the stories that everybody has and are willing to share within just that couple of hours. It's just it's quite lovely.
And there's something quite powerful about looking into each other's eyes as well, because we had to do an
Mm.
exercise at the beginning which I didn't like. I found that a bit, I was like, oh, ah,
Yeah.
but it is powerful. And both the people whose eyes I looked into came and talked to me at the end. Like they, they found me and we had a conversation, which I don't think we would have had if we hadn't made that quite
Yeah.
considered time of eye contact. And I remember doing something similar a few years ago on a course, and the person I was doing it with kind of really talked to me about how his relationship wasn't working, and and I don't know if
Yeah.
we would have, it kind of cut out the small talk. We just went straight to what was important and what we wanted to talk about.
Yeah, couldn't say it better. We as human beings, we need that connection. And we've had it for an eternity, it's like we've evolved that way. It's only really in the last 20 years where we're now getting removed, and we have this kind of um, additional abstraction layer, and it doesn't help us. Ultimately we still need to sit down, have a pint with each other, or have that kind of communication, the direct communication. We feel better for it.
Yeah, that human contact.
Mm.
Um, and it's interesting that you've done this. And so you've been, you've set up this business quite obviously takes up a lot of your time, but you've got this passion that you've been doing this alongside that. And I suppose that takes me to my next question, which is, so obviously your business hasn't been plain sailing all this time, but you've kept it going. You've made it a success. And
Mm.
how did you manage to persevere, like in terms of the other things that you were doing alongside your business to keep yourself driven and motivated?
What I realize now is a certain level of dysfunction is quite helpful.
Yeah,
Whether it's actually good for you is another thing, right? And I think ultimately, um, yeah, from a kind of entrepreneurial point of view or something like that, when if you speak to people that kind of just keep playing away until it's successful, and typically we only hear about the successes, but those who have, it's perseverance. But where does
yeah,
that perseverance come from? um, and as I said, there's a certain level of healthy dysfunction. When that taps into kind of unhealthy, it's a hard thing to know, very hard, right? And I think I've had a bit of both along the way. But ultimately it's that kind of keeps you going. Where that emanates from is, it's different from person to person. Um, but it really is just a question of, if people want to do it, it's just a question of perseverance, come up with a good idea and be prepared to sacrifice. The I think from my side, I think the kind of, maybe the competitive swimming, the daily in and out of the pool, hours and hours every day, that upbringing, family, all of these things have an impact on your resilience.
yeah, exactly. And you've also had you love surfing and windsurfing, and you've always taken time out to go off and disappear to the west coast of Ireland, and in a wetsuit, I'd think, you know, and I
Yeah,
almost think, you know, talking to me in like February and saying you're going off
yeah,
to Ireland to go surfing, and but you know, you take yourself away and you go and you get in the water and you've got that time to do whatever you're doing in the water, and I don't know where your
yeah.
mind is there, but yeah.
Yeah, it's hugely important, you know. It's like I
Mm,
realized when things were really getting tough, I wasn't doing that enough, you know. But
yeah,
certainly, I've got back into that. I'm finding more time for myself. Things are, you know, we've gone through that kind of, you know, curve. Things are going well now. It's great, great team. Really enjoying the work again. Um, and also you know the public speaking or ad libbing, whatever we want to call it. Yeah, and life in general. You know, my partner and myself, we're doing a lot of trips, and it's really nice. You know, the surfing. You know, I always look at it. You know, especially down in Kerry, this beautiful bay called Brandon Bay, and it's surrounded by mountains. You know, so
yeah,
you just paddle out or whatever it is, you know, half kilometer or whatever else, depending on the day, or a couple hundred meters, whatever, and um, and you're just this little speck, right? You're just this little speck in the water, you know, and you're surrounded by this beautiful landscape and big open sky, and you know where you are in the world. You know your position. You are literally just, you know, very transitory, and you're just this little grain of sand, and it could be, you know, all gone tomorrow. Um, and it's complete opposite to what we're trying to do in London. Very often, you know, you're trying to build something for yourself. But
yeah.
this takes you back to the reality that you are literally just, you know, it's life is short. You're just this speck of sand out there at the end of the day, and those oceans are going to be there in another million years. You're not going to be there in another 10, 50, whatever it's going to be, you know.
Yeah.
It kind of
And
grabs you in that sense.
do you celebrate success in your either in your personal life, if you know you've done a great session or you've done
Mm,
something great at work? Do you know, is there ways that you celebrate? I know it's not
mm.
necessarily a straightforward question because sometimes it can be a big or small success, but I suppose it's about that celebration or getting joy or recognizing the joy that you have.
That's a really good question. I'm not sure, you know, how well I can answer that one in all honesty. You know, my partner is like very much along the lines of like, you know, oh, fantastic, that's great news. Let's go out and
Yeah.
celebrate. And I said, yeah,
Yeah.
but we haven't signed anything yet. And he said, no, but it's
Yeah.
great. Let's sign it. Well, not until we sign. And it's like, I'm always kind of putting, you know, kicking that kind of celebration down the road a little bit because there's always something immediately after. Um,
Yeah.
and it is something I need to change. You know, I do feel the joy now more than I probably ever did, and you know, in recent years in this company, about our successes. But I don't specifically go out and say, you know, there is a celebration moment on that basis. You know, and it's probably something. And thanks for reminding me. It's probably something that we really do need to do a little bit more of, rather than just kind of getting together as a team and saying, "Well done, everybody." You know, we do need to actually kind of, you know, properly get together as a team and celebrate those moments.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's really important. It's funny, the people I've talked to doing this podcast, it's been quite a mixed reaction because some people are like, oh yeah, I do this and I do this and we have a thing, and other
Mm,
people are like, you're like, oh, but actually probably it's important because you get you just rolling with it, and sometimes you go, actually, no, I need to go and recognize what we've all done, and even if it's just like you say, getting people together and telling people they've done an amazing job, and
yeah.
all of you recognizing that.
What do you do?
That's What do I do? I suppose, yeah, I think what I've got more into it as I've got older. I think when I was younger, it was just, you know, it wasn't necessarily seen as so important. But now, like with my kids and husband, we'll go out for dinner. We've got our favourite Italian down the road, and we'll
Mm,
have a sort of a celebration dinner, and we'll do something. Even like the kids are going back to school next week, so we'll probably do something on the Sunday. We'll be like, oh, the kids are going back to school. So
same.
sometimes it's just recognizing those things, and I think also um, enjoying the ritual that goes alongside of those. It was like even just recognizing birthdays and anniversaries and things for people, because it's you realize it's not just about them, it's about you as well, and that opportunity to see that person, probably
Mm.
back what you said earlier about seeing people, and it's that same way in a nice
Yeah.
way. What would you want your obituary to say? Not in terms of achievements, but in terms of the life that you've lived and the person that you've been. If you're at the end of your life and you're looking back, what would you want to be saying about your life?
Hmm. Um, yeah. Wow. I'm not religious, so I believe, from an energy point of view, that's it. We move on. In terms of like that, there's David going to heaven, hell, whatever. That's not there for me. In terms of, let's say, have to answer this question. Um, the reality is, I don't care, to that extent. I'm dead. So,
Yeah, yeah,
but if I have to give an answer in terms of what would be nice to hear or what I would think looking back, um, and if it was just for me, I would say it would be nice to say I've lived an interesting life,
yeah,
and that the people who are really involved with me found, found some joy in that at times, um, and found some inspiration in that at times as well.
yeah, yeah,
Um, yeah, that's pretty much it.
yeah.
I hope it's been relatively helpful to some people, and yeah.
Is there advice that you can see your 70 something self giving you? What if you were to meet your 75-year-old self, what would he say to you?
I would say the advice I would give my younger self. Yeah, it's a tricky one, right? We're learning all the time.
Yeah,
Um, the advice on the path I've been on in the last few years, the advice I would give to myself, look, um, I'd look closely at who's in your life.
yeah, yeah,
Things are not always as they seem, and yeah, and people will impact your life. Consciously or unconsciously, you allow people in that you perhaps shouldn't, or they're already there in your life. So be cautious about who you have in your life.
yeah, yeah. And is there anything to flip that the other way? Is there anything you've been really grateful for in your life, good or bad?
I'm really grateful for some of the really good friends that I've had in my life, that have been
Yeah,
around me and stayed with me. I'm really just the older I get, the more thankful I am of that. I'm grateful, really grateful for my partner in my life as well, and I'm uh, yeah, grateful for the kind of um, interesting journey that it's been.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
apart from anything. When I set out first, when I left Ireland, I would have had no inclination about this path or these paths at all. So I'm just
yeah,
fascinated to actually, to actually have to be here, to be chatting with you, to be have been, we've been friends for, quite a long time, and to
yeah.
see those journeys and to still be in each other's circles. All of these things are kind of like I'm just super grateful for.
And what next? Have you got sort of something in the next year or so that you're thinking you'd like to do? And I suppose I mean not just in terms of your career with your business, but with your, the public speaking side of things. I'm quite interested to see where you take that as well.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's a passion, and it's like,
Yeah,
I think if you do anything and turn anything into a business, it does rob you a little bit of the joie de vivre of it. So I'd
yeah,
be very cautious about, thinking along those lines. Maybe there is something there. I know it's incredibly helpful, but that's my own kind of emotional, spiritual journey as well. Um, I don't necessarily want to inflict that. I want to be on people. I want to be, you know, part of whatever that is.
yeah,
So I think more exploration in that area is fascinating, and meeting more people in and around that. Um, Currently, I'm kind of really enjoying what I'm doing, but with every tech company, there definitely comes a either positive or a negative end. It looks like it's a positive direction. So after that, I don't know. Much like the transition from the motorcycles to the kind of weather forecasting initially. Um, I think I'll just leave it to the gods,
yeah,
and see what ultimately sits because hypothetically, if I did move on, I think I'd want to take a bit of a break from everything for a few months just to let things sit a little bit and just to come up with, okay, what feels right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I asked this question, well, it's quite a broad question, but I'm interested if you've got advice to others, and it's slightly a double-pronged question because also you've got a very more entrepreneurial mindset, and not everyone has that. So I'm quite intrigued. You must get asked for advice by people. Sort of what advice you'd give to other people.
From a professional level, be passionate about what you do,
Yeah,
not too passionate that it takes over your life, but and there are certainly periods in your life where you can afford to be more passionate and more orientated towards that. Perhaps career path, but be open to change. It's a
yeah,
fine balance between kind of being absolutely, single-minded and, blinkered in terms of getting something done, and actually allowing really nice and good things also to happen in your life as well. Fine balance. That balance is also measured by time, by your life, as you go through periods of your life. So just be cautious in that sense. Go for it.
yeah.
As I said, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it's absolutely true. So you go for it. I love that. No, it's
Yeah.
absolutely true. Yeah. Yeah. We only have one life. That's why this is called One Precious
Yeah,
Life.
it's a beautiful concept, it's a lovely
Yeah.
concept. And we come to
Mm.
it, right? I think we come to it with age as well.
So, on that note, I'm going to finish. Thank you so much, Dave. It's been absolutely wonderful. It's been so great.
We'll catch up in another dodgy pub sometime very soon, right?
Exactly.
Uh,
Thank you. So, if you enjoyed this, please do subscribe to One Precious Life. Thank you very much.